And I'm actually very happy that for the browser panel, I get some moderation help. And we have Krzysztof Modras from Go3 who's going to moderate the browser panel. And I'll let the people introduce themselves on stage, but we, in a sense, have Chenska from Opera, Anton Lazarev from Brave again, Rob Wu from Mozilla, Devlin Cronin from Google, and Sam MacBeth from DuckDuckGo. Welcome. Enjoy. You want mine?
Best. Well, long days, eh? So we got one last street. Look at those 5. Nothing more. Down. Thank you. So a long day, isn't it? And we have one last treat for you all. That's the browser panel. I must admit, that's the part of the conference that I wait the most for. So I'm super excited to have everyone here. So I don't have to tell you who those people are, but like we have representatives for all the major browsers, like, you know, they're into Google. We've had Anton from Brave, Tina from Opera, Rob from Mozilla, and now for the first time for our, I've reached the semi-club also, I'm the because it was some of them. So please once more welcome that on the stage. Yeah. And now I need to learn how to use the clicker. Like, this is called universal remote, but the kick should be called universally confusing remote. I don't think anyone grasped it from the first time. So I'll try it. All right. I will have to learn how to use back button. Something come. So we prepared a list of topics, and I would ask me some questions or guidance to the participants of the panel. But on the app, every step, I would also like to invite everyone from the audience to jump with the questions and ask them as we go, because there are many of those, and they're very diverse. And maybe on the end, we'll still find a few moments to talk about the questions that you may have to the panelists. So then, the browser system and how the collaboration of the developers goes. It's been a while that we have discussed MacBeth with you last time, but I really wonder how this went for you. Like now this is kind of over, like everyone's settled, like we know what went well, we know what didn't well, it didn't go that well, but I wonder, what is your like post-mortem post? Like we've done that, like what would you do better? Like how would you prepare for the next kind of manifest if one will come? And maybe we just start like, how's you like how we go from there, from the left, I guess.
Yeah, so we touched on this a little bit earlier in the previous talk, but I think we did meet a lot of our initial goals with Manifest v3. We set out to do something that improved the privacy and performance and the security of users and moved the extensions platform a little bit closer to the web and something that was a little bit more scalable. And I think that we did meet those goals. I think there was a lot of friction that was involved in every step of the way, and we got a lot of feedback from developers and from other browser vendors, for that matter. I think that is still one of the best things that came out of it was the establishment of a lot more of the fora and the groups that we have where people are communicating and providing us that feedback. And I think that's something that we did not have that much of going into it. And so we kind of, actually one of the first times that we shared out Manifest v3 was at the AdFilter Developer Summit in 2018 in San Francisco in a basement. And, I said, hey, there's this doc, it's public, it's open source, it's on this bug, take a look at it, get us some feedback. We actually didn't get any. And so it was kind of with the outpouring of confusion around Manifest v3 that we got a lot of developers beginning to chime in on the process. And I think that was hugely successful and also put us in a much, much better space going forward for when we want to do different large changes in the future. And that's something that we've been exercising since then of like, if we're making any changes or considering changes, we'll bring it up in both the public Google group as well as the Web Extensions community group and say, hey, this is something that we're considering. Are there things we should know about? Do people think that this is worthwhile, or if there's something that we need to do for protecting our users, similar to removing the load extension switch that Oliver mentioned? We have so much more opportunity to engage with developers and make sure we make that as seamless as possible and hopefully have it be a really positive outcome all around.
That's definitely positive. And we can also see that there is kind of a split in the market. So Google is now full Manifest v3, but Opera and Brave, Mozilla, Manifest v2 is still kind of around. Hebrew origins still kind of exist. Like, what do you think is the future to come? Like, will we be able to maintain this speed for way longer? Do you wish to maintain it for way longer?
Yeah, I guess I can speak to that. Brave has continued to maintain Manifest v2 even past Google's end of support for it. And I think to some extent Manifest v3 has not been as bad as people have perhaps made it out to be. It's not like completely the end of ad blockers or anything like that. But on the other hand, it is definitely a more gate-kept platform, and it's harder to get changes in. And we've definitely seen filterless maintainers and adblock extension engineers running into issues, posting issues to the public issue trackers about limitations they've been facing and limitations they want to be, numbers to be increased or features to be added or things like that. And that's just not a thing that they can implement anymore, at least not by themselves. And so in that context, I feel Brave's approach of building an ad blocker that is natively built into the browser and doesn't depend on any extension APIs has been a really powerful choice. And I think we definitely made the right choice there.
For Opera, Opera is also a very special way.
Yeah,
the way it handles.
Very similar, like for Opera, because we also have like built-in unblocker, and so like Manifest v3 doesn't affect us so much, but we still have some users on Manifest v2. Like it's around 8% of our extension user base now, and we'll try to maintain it as long as we can, though as long as the multi-home module is supported. So yeah, very good.
And for Mozilla, this is obviously completely different because there were never those technical constraints from Manifest v3 design. Like, is this virtually possible that you continue to make Manifest v2 working infinity? Do you even want?
So, as you alluded to, Firewalk is the only independent engine out of the ones on the stage with their own independent extension implementation. And like you said, we are not bound by external upstream changes that force MV2 removal or deprecation. And we currently have no plans to deprecate MV2.
Well, that's certainly very important for part of the community that wants to rely on those more powerful web extensions that use Manifest v2. And I wonder for DuckDuckGo perspective, if DuckDuckGo is not only a search engine, it's also a browser, that's also a browser extension. I wonder how hard for you it is now to maintain this setup. And, well, you certainly go Manifest v3 and this public have out is to go to the same platforms, but is this, would you wish to stay with Manifest v2? Would this allow you to do more?
Yes, as you say, we have like our own browser extension, so search and tracker protection. So we build in a lot of different technologies for the tracker protection as well as blocking and also fingerprinting protections. And MV3 was a challenge because we're coming from a very stable platform with MV2 that had been around a long time, had cross-platform support, and we didn't really need to change our implementation for a long time. With MV3, we had to rework almost all of the different protections. So as well as the tracker blocking, you had to look at how to send certain headers like GPC header, update the content script injection, that kind of thing, which was a significant cost to kind of stay static still. In some cases, go a little bit backwards because you had to unship some protections. So that was challenging. And still to this day, we have to support both MV2 and MV3 because MV2 is still has some features which work slightly better, particularly for attribution of what trackers are loaded and not blocked. We still essentially use the web request pipeline to get that information. So we essentially have two blocking stacks running concurrently, and we have to maintain those all going forward. So it's been an increased maintenance cost across the board.
So I have a follow-up question to that. You mentioned that you use web requests for detecting things, but Chrome still supports web requests in non-blocking fashion.
Yeah.
Does that mean that you can still have MP3 to block it with DNR and a web request to collect your statistics?
Exactly. So we have the blocking web request code path, which checks every request and decides if we should block it or not. In MV3, the blocking effect does not happen because we have the DNR rules that do that, but this is still active to do the counting, essentially.
And it was mentioned a couple of times today, this W3C group, community group for web extensions, as a place to build some consensus among the browsers. I'm wondering if this is actually a feature that would help us to avoid line tests before, so that we can build some consensus and some stability on the market, so that we don't have to maintain multiple code bases, because now we have this platform to actually discuss where that would be a pain point before we devote ourselves to some directions.
I don't think that the goal would be to avoid Manifest v4. Again, we don't have plans for Manifest v4 yet, but I don't think that iterating the platform with some of those breaking changes every now and then is inherently bad. I think that we would want to avoid is having as much friction or as much developer pain in that migration. And I think what the Web Extensions Community Group positions us to do is have a forum where we can discuss as browser vendors, but also directly with developers, what are the types of changes that make sense and what would be particularly arduous for you to implement. So I think it's less around never doing Manifest before or saying that we can avoid that, and more about how do we make that as seamless and beneficial a transition as possible across the board.
Yeah, and I think that having independent implementations of these kind of things is also very important, because that is a force of innovation and force of competition in the market. And if everyone is stuck on one platform, it's a lot harder to innovate. So I think it's nice to have some other players in the field doing their own thing too.
From the other standpoint, let's imagine we have the most powerful web extension platform ever. So we have Manifest v2 and Manifest v3, all of this are updated. Wouldn't this actually be simpler for browser vendors that want to have some content filtering built in to implement those things as web extensions? And just to enable this full spectrum of possibilities of the platform to the extensions.
So Firefox and Safari are currently in that boat. Firefox even more so because of the longer history of the extension platform. We both support MV2 and MV3, and developers can choose which of the two to take. Safari's implementation is completely new, so they had to start from the ground, and their implementation is basically MV2 does some things differently, and they support it in that way. And generally, to developers, there's not really a difference if they start new on that platform. It's mostly about developers who are used to the previous state of the platform and then encounter friction when they try to migrate. I think one of the lessons that we can take from this whole thing is, if you offer alternatives, make sure that there's a reasonable path to migrate from the previous state to the new state.
I think I can also add some context. So I think one thing that's been very good coming out of the W3C group is this cross-platform, that particularly the fact that Safari come on board and brought in support for MV3 there. And this is getting particularly relevant. So for DuckDuckGo, we also build browsers, but mostly based on web views. And web views is somewhere where there is every web view has its own API for blocking requests or doing script injection and this kind of thing. And now, this year, we're reaching a point with them that some web views are saying, oh, we can also support web extensions because the underlying engine supports web extensions. And this can make it easier to do cross-platform privacy features or blocking, because you can just lean on this cross-platform API that's well-known, well-documented, you know how it works. And you don't have to have these disparate implementations for each specific web view.
It's good to hear. And so we can see that this kind of assimilation of ideas around web extensions also better the native browsers, what Suko say, well, not necessarily like the WebKit or Chromium directly, but the approach of DuckDuckGo actual benefits from personalization. Cool. And we see that many browsers nowadays include many of the privacy features embedded. Some browsers implement like ad blockers and some other tracking protection tools. I wonder what you think. Like, should there be a way for those native ad blockers or privacy protection tools to interact with the web extensions that users install? And we know you said that many users believe that the more ad blockers they have, the more private they are, and this doesn't always work as they think. For many reasons, sometimes performance, as you can think about usability or site breakage, be the most important ones. How you imagine like the browsers cooperating or maybe helping other add-ons to communicate with each other to prevent those problematic situations?
I think that we see this a little bit now with many different implementations of declarative net request, where declarative net request in Chrome and the underlying layer uses the same implementation, which is flat buffers and the URL filter that Chrome uses for its own built-in ad blocker. And so I think there's already a little bit of that coming into play. And we can also leverage having all of those rules at the beginning in order to make sure that they, in theory, play well together. I think that we can expand that even further and kind of have a better system for that. And there's been bits and pieces along the way there where, for instance, in Chromium, there's also like the shared global limit and things like that, where we understand that a lot of these ad blockers do potentially come together. I think there's more that we can do there that you're kind of alluding to of like, if you have 3 ad blockers, how do you make sure that you're not applying the same 3 filter lists across all of them and the duplication there? And I think there's a lot of opportunity for that in terms of reducing some of that space. So I think that is an interesting area to explore.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, there can be a lot of conflict between these tools. And the most challenging thing for Brave as a vendor of an ad blocking tool is we often get requests for, oh, hey, some site is broken. Can you please figure out what's going wrong and fix it? And one of the hardest things there is to deal with, an exponential combination of different settings that somebody might have tweaked in their browser before submitting the report. So we have to be able to go back and reproduce, okay, this is exactly what configuration they're using, and only then can I see it. And so it is kind of a tricky situation, because the more of these tools you kind of pile on top of each other, the more explosion of different settings there could be. So I do think it's nice to have it as an option if you really want to, if you know what you're doing. But I also feel that maybe don't expect too much warranty from this kind of a setup, right?
I can agree with Anton on this point. I'm not sure that there's a lot of issues where we have a problem with native ad blocker and extension. Maybe the similar case when you have a few extensions enabled, because we don't know really what's happening then. Like they sometimes do, usually they do asynchronously. So rules applies also asynchronously. So it's the same case basically. If we can share something here, always extensions can get, if there is an ad blocker turned on or turned off. So maybe it's also can be some kind of notification from extension side. We also provide some kind of information, even in the console logs, so that it's ad blocker, something blocked by native ad blocker. Yeah, it's this case.
The request to have some unification to allow extensions to cooperate together kind of already exists in the DNR API. Still in Firefox we see that most ad blockers still continue to use blocking web requests because of its powers. And that also allows these extensions to each do their own thing in their own innovative way. And generally the recommendation is to not use different ad blockers together because they conflict with each other. If I think about the different scenario, not ad blockers specifically, but for example, password managers, there has been long-standing requests of extension APIs to allow password managers to integrate more closely into the native browser autofill feature. but still, what I often hear is that password managers also want to have their own ability to do their own magic sauce of having better autofill detection. So even if we were to offer these capabilities, I still expect extensions to choose the most powerful way to work in the most optimal way that they can do to offer functionality to users.
Yeah, I think I'd echo the point here that I think stacking privacy extensions on top of each other is not good for privacy, not good for performance or for breakage. Unless the one exception to that is if the protections they're offering are orthogonal to each other. So if you have one content blocker, one fingerprinting protection thing, so they're not going to interfere with each other. The reason I say this is that particularly in breakage, it's a combination of both blocking things and not blocking things. And as soon as you have two extensions which have different opinions on one side about what to block and what not to block, then you're just going to get the resulting breakage. And then the resulting issue for list maintainers or people building block lists is that breakage is extremely difficult to debug because you have to get that same configuration that the user is running to reproduce the issue in the first place. So most maintainers are running with the assumption that people are running a single blocker with a certain standard filter list configuration, and they're building their mitigations using that configuration. So it won't work for any users who have decided to mix and match.
So it looks like universally from the browser vendor's side, it's best to have just one ad blocker installed in a browser, or perhaps even none.
I think that Sam put it very well, that it depends on what the purpose is. And yeah.
Like, also my question for the community, like, how deep is this question, like, how deep the problem is? Because, like, for me, it's mainly what we thought, it's the corner cases that we can solve on the side of our native ad blocker, of course, but the question is, like some particular cases when this happens. So maybe the issue is in implementation. Like, for example, AdGuard and uBlock have different kind of implementation for snippets, kublets, and something happens there. So the question is if it's just a corner cases, so we can do some fixes by our side, of course. And if it's not, so maybe we need to rethink the policy. So just don't say anything.
Do you think this is something that can actually be effectively communicated to users so they understand the rationale, if I were to say?
I think that the extensions themselves might be in the best position to do that. There are various ways that extensions can detect if other extensions are installed. And I think that, I know ad blockers and content blockers talk to each other. And I think it would be interesting to see if there were some kind of like joint messaging where you detect if there's more than one installed and you send them to a jointly authored page that said, we don't care which you choose, just please only choose one. And have that messaging around like we all agree this is the best. Or to Sam's point of if they're orthogonal, even having guides of if you want to mix and match, here are settings that make sense to have. Here are settings that we all agree don't make sense. Please only choose one of these. But I think that makes the most sense coming from extensions, and I think that you would have the best insight there into both how to mess with that as well as which of those combinations do make sense for a user to potentially have.
I think there's a bit of a marketing challenge there too, because every extension is going to want to say, oh, use us because we're the best.
And that's what I was thinking, like if you have this joint consortium, because I know that there are a lot of those shared tools and things like that, if you can point them to here's a common thing that we all have.
I wonder, do we have questions from the audience?
There is some consensus. At least we're trying to involve more filterless authors. So if there is a bad role in, say, a list, and it's not a default list, but someone adds it anyway, and it interferes with another list, we often are sharing details to say, hey, maybe not, if I still want to keep the list, maybe it's a specific line that's causing the issue. Maybe just remove the line. maybe the better option is to try and collaborate with the list authors that have problematic rules. And I guess the other issue would be people who have old lists that have never been updated, but they install it by habit for whatever reason, and it works 50% or 60% of the time, but that time it doesn't work, they'll blame the extension, they'll blame everything else, but forget that what they installed maybe 6 months ago is the main cause of the issue. And I've come across that many times with some extensions, some lists. So I'm not sure if there's a quick fix for that. I've talked to Anton about this maybe about a year or so ago. It was like, should we deny someone installing a list that we know is bad? Like, if we know it's going to cause issues, should we deny the user? And it's like, but it's user choice. And so it's sort of like, do we want to give the user a choice of installing a bad extension or a bad list? And it's, we haven't obviously made something concrete, nothing official, but it's sort of like highlights often outdated rules, bad rules. But we are improving the list with collaboration with other list maintainers, and it will improve over time. But yeah, this is just a note regarding this subject.
I would like to mention this compatibility issue. So the browsers currently provide the API that allows a browser extension to disable a different browser extension. The problem with this API is that, and we face it with ad blockers and with VPN extension, for instance. You detect a compatibility issue, you suggest the user to disable that extension, then the user uninstalls your extension and nothing is restored.
First off, I wouldn't recommend disabling user extensions without some sort of prompt or knowledge. I would suggest that you point them to something that explains the situation and have them make a choice.
But you explain the situation. You tell them that there's a compatibility issue. For instance, with proxy, you have like several extensions. Only one extension can manage proxy settings, right? So you don't have a choice. You say the user tries to use your extension. You say, okay, there's another one that holds it, and you have to disable it. You don't have any other choice. You cannot say to that extension, please, don't touch proxy settings for the moment, right? So.
Is there browsers?
So there's definitely a space for improvement there.
Is that a browser-specific issue? Because in Firefox, any extension can still be enabled, and only one extension wins in terms of setting the preference.
But you still, you can have several proxy extensions anywhere. So it's not unique to Chrome. It's just the consequences are a little bit different. But the whole idea is that the current API is not enough to handle compatibility issues. So there could be some generic solution that will whether it's better than what we have now.
It's a suggestion for FD4 probably.
Yeah, and by the way, one more thing on that. This is what Krzysztof was talking initially about compatibility with your respective browsers' features. So if we could also interact with them somehow, because compatibility issues happen there as well. So there's tracking protection, Firefox, that we would probably like to have it disabled when there's a full-scale ad blocker in play, and we can't there's no way. Well, what do we do? Communicate this to the user.
I believe there is an API to disable it and extensions to disable it.
Okay, taking that back. But again, but then there's Opera's ad blocker. So there's no generic API for that.
As far as I know, no.
I mean, it's pretty much the same kind of issue, the compatibility issue with some feature or some extension. And, well, maybe web extensions could they'll think up some, you will say, like, think up yourself and bring it to W3C group. Maybe I will, but, well...
I think it is a case-by-case basis, and for some of those particular things that you mentioned, like having the browser's built-in protection, that is one that I think does make sense to have an extension API for. And as Rob mentioned, there is one in Firefox, and there are many controls in Chrome to also allow for extensions to disable ours. There isn't a generic API for that because there isn't generic tooling in the browser. And so you might want to treat those differently because there might be different compatibility concerns across them. But that is something that I think does make sense. And even if it's not available across all browsers, that is a path forward. The interaction between extensions, I think, is a little bit more fraught because we as the browser don't have as much of an ability to know what the right thing to do there is. And that's where we really do need users to make the decision.
Yeah. Well, I kind of agree, but well, the problem's still there, and well, what you suggest basically is you guys like developers like sort it out between yourselves. Maybe we can, but it's pretty hard. What bothers me? Well, but mostly the only thing that I actually need is the way to roll back these the changes that are done through browser management. So if I do something through browser management and then my extension disappears, then maybe it makes sense to at least suggest to the user that, well, these are some changes that you might want to have back. Same goes, by the way, for the Chrome privacy set of APIs. When I change something there and then I remove the extension, maybe you want to suggest to the user that...
We automatically change it back if it's controlled by
So you do it with us.
Correct, because it's an extension control setting. So when that extension is uninstalled, then it goes to either the next extension or back to the default.
If 2 different extensions disable web RTC and then I uninstall one.
We should talk more later, but the short version is it will actually just go back to the other one. But I think that Carlos's hand has been up for a little while, so...
Right. I had a question on the web request blocking. Firefox does support it in MP3 as well. I know that Chrome is not open to doing the same, but I was wondering for the other browser vendors if they are open of adding support for web request blocking in MP3.
Yeah, I guess at Brave we don't have any plans for that necessarily. I think if somebody were to like offer a patch for something like that and maintain it, that is potentially a possibility. But yeah, at the moment, that's just not on a roadmap anymore.
All right, let's jump to the next step. So there are some exciting things happening nowadays, and we have new platforms coming, and I don't mean AI yet, but something quite cool have happened for the Android world, and this is Edge have continued the work of Firefox actually, and it brought unlock to Android, which is something that many users actually have been anticipating. And also there is Edge for iOS, which now kind of shows that mobile extensions are actually possible. And I wonder if other browsers are also looking to join the company and allow the mobile web extensions.
So on the Chrome side, this is something that I, as a user and developer of the extensions platform, have wanted for many years. And it's just that the platform on mobile is rather different from the platform on desktop. And that was something that we were actually talking with a couple of your colleagues about just at the break. There's a lot of constraints there. Some of them are technical, some of them are resource, some of them are around UX and transparency to the user. I think that it is really interesting to see how some of these other browsers have implemented it, and I do think that does potentially change this space a little bit in terms of both user expectations and what is possible and what we see that might work or might not. So on the Chrome side, it's always something that we are looking into the potential of. But
I mean, it's not 2018 anymore, it's 2025. Mobile devices are way faster. And kind of Firefox proved it already, it works. Now Edge proves it works. Safari proven it works. I wonder if Brave can prove it works.
We have
or Opera can prove it
We have actually been watching the space with quite some curiosity, and I don't want to spill any of your secrets, but we did notice some work on the Chromium bug tracker about desktop Android extensions. So I don't know. We're excited for it, and we're definitely going to enable it if it's in Chromium.
Yeah, as far as I know, like from Opera side, because we have different kind of browsers for mobile, they also have Opera for Android, for iOS, GX for mobile, and they're looking for some kind of issues here, but still it's performance cases, and like as far as I know, they're not announced yet anything. So.
And I just wonder, really, like looking back, as it did kind of disproves one of the assumptions from MacBeth v3 at Manifest Key2 extensions were not the format. Like we now see uBlock Origin working perfectly fine in Edge for Android. It's the same uBlock Origin, and does this give some perspective that maybe that was not the target that you were looking for?
Oh, I absolutely agree that uBlock Origin was never the target that we were looking for. We were never targeting uBlock Origin, despite what Raymond Hill might say. No, so the problem with extensions and performance has always been that it's not the top extensions. It's literally no one in this room that we've ever been worried about. It's always been the extensions that comprise some of the long tail, or that are doing really, really egregious tactics for various different reasons. And those are the ones that we've seen causing problems from a performance and usability standpoint. All of the extensions in this room really care about the user experience and really care about performance and make it a top priority for them to make sure that they aren't degrading the user's experience. If we could say, yes, we are fine with these extensions using the APIs from MV2 or things like that, we would have, but we don't want to be in that walled garden state. We don't want to say, oh, these extensions, we trust the developers, but these ones, if you're a new developer or you're learning the ropes, sorry, you degraded the user experience and now you can't use these special tools. We didn't want that bifurcation of the platform. And so unfortunately, one of the challenges here is like as Oliver mentioned, you can't have nice things sometimes because people will misuse them. And so we have to somewhat meet in the middle and figure out what is the way that we make it easy for developers to write a performant extension. The goal there is to not degrade what developers can do, but make sure that they can still do everything that they want to be able to do and have it done in a performant and privacy-preserving way by default, rather than having them need to kind of go through hurdles or risk copying the wrong Stack Overflow post.
And I'm wondering, because on mobile specifically, most of the browser vendors did have some content filtering features for many, many years. And there must be some findings that you got from implementing those. And I wonder if some of those can be translated to the web extensions. If you have learned anything specifically, being a browser vendor, that you are being more effective with when doing the ad block or tracking blocking, that you could benefit the web extensions and the wider ecosystem, because you are in this unique position of having to do it in a native way, being more privileged, and if this can be shared with the others now.
Yeah, I think for Brave Mobile, we've basically been using the same code base on Android and desktop, and that is how Chromium does it upstream. And so all of the ad blocking and fingerprinting protections that we've been adding into desktop Brave have literally just made it into Android with no or very little modification. So that's been very powerful. And I think, honestly, that is the way it should be. I don't think the mobile platforms should be gate-kept any more strongly than desktop ones. I've definitely seen that Brave iOS is limited by Apple's App Store policies, and that's very frustrating, and we can't always deliver exactly the same level of privacy protection on iOS for that reason, but we do our best with what is available. But yeah, I definitely think that the best platform is the most open and free one.
Are those policies technical or review policies?
Yes.
So do you find any of the findings that you got could benefit the other platforms?
So I find So working with native browsers built on WebViews, that still the developer experience of web extensions is just better for all of these use cases. So particularly when you talk about like content scripts and message passing, it's just nicer to write that all in JS. And then you have the issue of the kind of skills bridge from native engineers to web engineers, and that's always like a challenge when you're implementing these features that have to be kind of half of it written in native and then half in JS. That's why the web extension API is much nicer for this. So I'm actually really happy that now we can start using web extension APIs more for these native features in WebViews, because now we can just say install this extension, and then the web engineers and the extension engineers can work on that feature independently and not need native engineer support there.
To make you correct that you just reverse my question. That you say that the browser vendors should use more web extensions for the standardization and using of the web knowledge, so they can build better unblockers.
Perhaps. I think in terms of like the skill requirements, when you're staffing these kind of projects, it just makes more sense to have that split.
Well, that's why we have panels, we have opinions. All right, and of course this is 2025, so there is AI everywhere, and AI comes to your browsers. And I really do wonder, how does this change the user's privacy? And if the browser role should not actually change, and now that if you have an LLM in a sidebar doing all those agentic stuff on user behalf, and what do you think basically about users' privacy in an agentic browser world when things are not being done by humans only, but they still require some protection?
I think a lot of the VC startups that are trying to innovate in this space are just like throwing whatever they can at the problem, and it's turning out predictably, and there are a lot of privacy issues, and Brave has released 2 research papers about vulnerabilities we've found in some of these tools already. So it really has to be done thoughtfully before it can be rolled out to a large audience. I think there's just so much risk of controlling this like intelligent thing to your personal data. Your browser is literally the most personal software that you use, right? You put all your billing information, your personal identifier information, and everything goes in there, your browsing history. And having that all be possible to just put a prompt injection and stolen somewhere is very dangerous.
Okay, from our side, like we actually launched a browser, like AI browser. So there's 2 possibilities there, and like server side and local one. So if you, for example, if you haven't stored any privacy extensions, they also will work when you browse with LLM, when you use prompts. Like so it's not only in the sidebar, but it's generally work with your tabs. So all things that you have basically installed like in extensions previously, or ad blocker if you turned it on, it's also respect your settings.
Firefox does have some features supported by AI and LLMs, but these always run locally. There's no data transmitted to Mozilla. There is also some integration of third-party chat providers based on user demand. So some subset of users are willing to sacrifice some privacy for functionality. That's a choice that they can make, but Firefox is not going to send data. Even Mozilla doesn't want to know users' data, so we don't do that. On extension side, we have provided one experimental API to allow extensions to build functionality upon the AI models that are known to Firefox. And well, the extent developers are in the best place to create functionality based on the available primitives to them.
And from DuckDuckGo, we're so on our search results page, we're shipping a AI chat product. And like all of our products, the idea this is giving you access to these tools, but with privacy built in. So obviously you can chat with these popular models like OpenAI's and so on, but not with the kind of tracking that they have there. So there's none of this like memory of your previous chats in there. You can hit a button just to clear all your chat histories out. And the chat history is also only stored client-side in local storage. So that's one thing I bring in. And then on the browser side, like everyone are looking into how AI can enhance the browsing experience, but treading very carefully because obviously this is extremely sensitive information. So looking at things like browsing history should probably only be processed with local models because that's not something you want to send out to third-party companies. And looking at other kind of techniques we can use to improve privacy, like for example, you can given a prompt, you can see is there something that looks like PIA in this prompt. You can remove it before sending to the model, and then when the data comes back, replace the placeholders that you put in back with the PIA, so the responses still makes sense given what you told it, but the PIA is not transmitted. So we're looking at various different techniques like that.
Sounds like a lot of work to do for the browser. So do you feel that you will become this mediator between the LLMs living inside of the browser, or this will be more like systematic control on maybe review level?
I don't know if this is something that you could adequately do at review level. I think that there's far too much flexibility there, and I'm not entirely sure that I would always want the browser to be the mediator as well, because I think that would be very limiting in the type of innovation that we see in the wild. I think that going back to your original question of like, how do you feel for user privacy? I think concerned is one of them, and I think there is a very real risk here, particularly with people who rush into this and don't have privacy and security at the forefront when they're building these out. And I think that, unfortunately, that is something that people will have to take into account very early on. And as you mentioned, we've seen many of these different browsers or startups come out, and we've seen potential attacks that can be used. And I think that it is something where we're going to have to figure out the right way to change how people think about this and have better segmentation of data across the board.
Yeah, I think segmentation of data is a very powerful thing that we need for AI, especially in browsers. Same way that we have done partitioning of cookies between sites. I think information from one site shouldn't be possible to leak to another site by default just because your LLM agent is using it. So I think Brave's approach to AI in the browser will be quite opinionated and maybe restrictive in some ways that protects your privacy. But the nice thing is we'll be doing it open source, so it's not like a gatekeeping sort of behavior. It's we're doing the best we can, and if somebody wants to build on top of that and improve it, that's possible too.
Do we have any thoughts or questions from the audience?
Since we're talking about mobile platforms, and recently iOS allowed web browsers to use other basically engines than WebKit, and I'm wondering that there are plans from Firefox to use Gecko in their iOS-based in their browser for getting edits.
So we are looking into it. One big issue is that by policies we will have to distribute a separate engine, because only in EU we could offer an own engine, because that is quite restrictive. So basically we would have to maintain two separate apps and start from zero with the Gecko-based engine. That is not really a feasible path towards having an own engine.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we are also itching for that capability globally, but it's just Apple being Apple, you know.
Quick follow-up question on that.
is Apple not allowing to have two engines in one application? So it will have to be a different application, a different app. Is that correct?
From what I understand, there has to be. This is something specifically for the EU. By the way, I'm not working on the team. This from what my understanding of it.
Yeah, me neither. I have very limited information.
Right. It's specifically a requirement derived from EU legislation. So the way to comply to it is to allow app providers to do that for the EU, and then it doesn't apply globally.
Yeah.
So a better way to have it actually be free all over the world is to allow the whole world to have their own engine.
Yeah, I guess that's the easy way. They wouldn't allow a bit of a feature flag inside the app to see whether you are in the EU or outside. Yeah, I think that's, I see.
Even if they did something like that, the challenge of maintaining both of these in parallel is still huge.
I was going to say that as well. Even if you had one app, thank you. Even if we had one app, I'm working at Mozilla as well. The effort of maintaining two different engines at the same time, that's massive.
Yep.
So looks like it's both users and also legislators that it looks for more transparency and user agency on the platform. And with the rise of AI, because those problems will only intensify. But we also see that the browser platforms themselves try to streamline and the way the users interact with the extensions by the permissions, the sandboxes, and we see interesting development from Mozilla side when the user concept may be streamlined. I wonder if there is some room for collaboration between browser vendors to create a language that regular users will be able to immediately identify and understand across those platforms, so that their user agency and transparency in the browser will actually increase. It looks like we're at the moment in the situation of market being very fragmented, and this doesn't necessarily translate well to users putting more trust into those platforms. And we definitely don't want to have the situation when people that blindly trust the next LLM. And what are your thoughts there? Where are we going with that?
I think that there's certain areas that do make a lot of sense for us to collaborate, especially if we talk about changes in the permissions model, segmentation of data, different permissions that we might introduce, different ways that we might prompt the user. Things like that do make sense to collaborate on. I don't think that's something that we would necessarily standardize on or standardize the language around. And I actually think that's a good thing. For one, I think that it allows us to experiment with different pieces. But more than that, I think that a lot of browsers have different user bases and different types of users. And what makes sense for us to communicate in Chrome to our users might not be the same that makes sense for Brave to communicate to their users, because there might be a different general understanding there. And I don't think that it makes sense to inherently require treating those users the same or communicating in the same way, because they're fundamentally different. And so I think that being able to both collaborate where it makes sense to have those techniques, but allow browsers to diverge with communication or specific grant style is probably the right path forward there.
Yeah, and I think some of that fragmentation is also a good thing in terms of being able to push the limits of what's possible. Like, for example, I think Brave rolled out our permission prompt for localhost access in 2023, and that's something that is now landing in Chromium this year. So that's one example of, like, you know, we're a smaller player. We decided to take the risk of, like, maybe there will be too many of these permission pop-ups and users will get annoyed. But now it's going to be broadly part of the web platform because it's adopted by the largest player, and that brings privacy protection to everyone in a way that maybe they felt would have been too risky to do from the beginning, but we showed it by example that it's something that's viable.
It's like a UI question. Like, okay, it's a question of UI basically to make it visible and to make it understandable for users from the one side, and from the another, like we don't want to overwhelm users with a lot of pop-ups like this extension needs this and that request because users don't understand it. So yeah, it's tough question. So like maybe we will rely on some kind of Chromium policy here, like what they do. So this way.
So the feature that you mentioned that is available in Firefox and will be required of new extensions soon is that extension authors are required for new submissions, not for updates. Extension authors are required to declare the data collection practices that they do in a machine readable way, so that Firefox can have a unified user experience to allow users to know at install time what the data collection practices of an extension is. This offers more transparency. Extensions don't have to build their own UI because we always required it by policy that extensions had to request permissions and request consent. Now we offer an API to allow extensions to request it. We looked at many extensions and extracted some common collection categories, and these are supported by Firefox. And this is something that we will probably improve and work on and iterate on in the future, but we have to start somewhere to give users control over their data.
I find permission prompts and modals, particularly in extension and privacy space, quite challenging topic because a lot of users do not understand what these are about. We saw this a few talks here in the IO talk, where the permissions model for Safari extensions is that we'll ask you, can it have permissions for all sites? And a lot of users will immediately associate this is something bad. It's asking for something and it's going to collect some data about it, and users will default to no. But as an extension developer, in the context of the DuckDuckGo extension, we will almost always choose a path that does not require a permissions prompt, including not shipping features, because we would have to ask for permission. That's just the fact that we know that users will generally opt out of these. And also as a developer, you have little chance to shape the user expectations around those pop-ups because they come from the browser Chrome, and you don't have much opportunity to kind of prompt in advance. And I think even when you do have chance, it's difficult to communicate these things.
And we know that many of those challenges come also from the dog regulators. We have GDPR, behavior, among others, like many regulations. And they brought us to the world when we had consent management platforms all over the place, and people started to develop this cookie blindness. It almost looked like that in the best case scenario for web extension developers is when the users get the same and they will ignore their pop-ups. At the same time, we are all mortified when they do the same tumbles. Do you think there is a potential to strike a balance here, to bring some more transparency and maybe user conscious?
I think that it's tricky because I think in a lot of these cases, it's unfortunately out of our hands as browser vendors. We are still largely beholden to those different regulations. And those different regulations might be very specific in what they require or allow us to do. And they may be contradictory in some cases. In some cases, we may be mandated to do action A and then mandated not to do action A, or mandated to action B in the exact same situation. And so there's not always the same level of freedom that we have there. I do think that on the positive side, there's large consensus in the community of both browser vendors and extension developers and web developers, but also just among users around what is useful versus not. And I think cookie banners are widely held as one of those things that's pretty much not in most cases. And so there have been discussions around what could we do to try and provide an easier way out of this and what are our options in that way. But anytime we get into regulation, it's extremely challenging.
Yeah, I think that uselessness of the cookie notices is exactly why at Brave we just decided to get rid of them altogether. And that's why we developed Cookie Crumbler to automatically find these things and proactively get rid of them. We have all the protections in the browser already with partition storage and blocking certain scripts to essentially protect users from all of the harms that these consent notifications are trying to get users to opt into anyways. So it really doesn't matter. It's just a completely useless box on the screen that gets in the way. So I totally think there's no reason to show it to users.
So I wouldn't say they're useless. So what they do allow is users to send a signal that they don't agree with certain business practices that have become the norm. And yeah, so we had the presentation earlier, like we ship this feature that rejects cookies when possible and sends that signal to sites. We also have this global privacy control is another similar to do not track as a standard, and the signal that we send, I think Brave sends it as well. And that applies in some jurisdictions like in California and is legally binding, so that's like an opt-out for data. So I think this is useful, and also what we see is that, so we've heard from regulators that these people opting out and these signals being sent do have an impact. It feeds back to publishers who see lots of users are opting out, and this affects how they think about what advertising they place and whether they use tracking technologies or not.
We do have global privacy control as a signal, and I do feel that for a lot of these consent management providers, if they're looking for the signal that somebody is not like actively consenting into these things, I think they can find it if they really want to, but I don't think they want to, so it's a question of incentives, right?
Do we have any questions to this?
Just with regards to the language, it's more of a comment than a question, but I think that actually some standardized, I kind of disagree with you there, because I think that some standardized language would be really useful across different browser vendors. I think that you're right, different vendors have different audiences, but I think there are things which, if they had a more specific meaning, like what is the definition of a tracker, and what is fingerprinting, what is consent exactly, what are you consented to? It's like some basic terms. I think the language difference can be implemented in how you use these terms. So maybe some collaboration on that kind of standardization might be useful. Just for people on the end users, so when you get a message that says something, you understand what that means. And it won't happen straight away, I wouldn't have thought, but over time, especially with, bigger publications in the media, reusing those terms, and the public hopefully would start to understand what those things mean on a broader sense. But yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges still is whether or not users will, whether or not that will ever reach the main user. And so we do have a lot of instances of that. I think the most extreme example would be we have a web specification which does define very clearly, here is what a URL is, here is what a domain is, here is what a port is. And there are very similar things that go into other language aspects of here is what we mean when we say this, and that all browsers kind of refer back to, but that never really ends up reaching the user in quite the same way. And so I do think that there is value in us aligning as browser vendors on what do we mean when we say this, but I think it will always be a challenge to have that reach the user.
I agree, it's always a challenge.
Yeah.
But I think that, like, for example, the word cookie, I mean, my mom knows what a cookie is now, but like 10 years ago, she had no idea. But I think one of my benchmarks has always been, if something appears on the BBC, then it's kind of reached the general, consciousness of mass public. And when that happens, I think use of those terms, if it's agreed on what those terms mean across the different browser vendors, that be helpful.
I think that's true, and I think that actually does play into it, where, again, cookie is one of those things that is standardized and is spec'd out. And so I think that we do organically do that as browser vendors in the broader web community, and we do have that shared language when it makes sense. And it's just that sometimes the permission prompts that we have lag far enough behind that, where a lot of people knew now what a cookie is, but probably no one knows what the HSTS list is outside of this room, right? So if we have something around like bypass the HSTS list when making connections, that's not going to be something that we can use, even if we all have a link out to say, here's what this actually does. No one's going to click that. Not no one. Relatively few people click that learn more link. And so I think that the situation you're describing is actually working entirely correctly. Of over time, some of these things that become important enough to general users make it into the general vernacular, and then we can begin using them. Things like cookie, things like URL for the most part. Those are pieces that we now do use in our language prompts across browsers because we have been able to align with them. So I think it's working, it's just slow.
Yeah, maybe I'm suggesting that perhaps it could be helped along a little bit. But anyway, thank you for the answer.
Sadly, we have just reached an overtime of our discussion, which is like kind of sad because we can keep going for hours. So I hope like that everyone around like will continue to discuss those kind of topics. Like
or we can keep going for beer over in like 28 minutes. So.
Exactly, and let's do about that. Yeah. So thank you very much. It was always a pleasure to have you here, and I hope that next year actually we could bring even more browser vendors to the discussion. A shout out to Edge and Sapori. To be lovely to have you again, so please come. But thank you very much to you all for having this brief chat.
Thank you for moderating.